Were there any safe jobs in the Old West? Some were safer than others, but it was also called the Wild West for a reason. There was danger around every corner. It didn't matter if you were a miner or a railroad worker, a bartender or business owner. There really wasn't a day you could safely say you were gonna get home from a day of work alive. One job you would not want to have if you wanted to live to a ripe old age was a lawman. For starters, there was no formal structure of law like we have today. Every town would have to establish their own methods for dealing with crime. This meant lawmen would often use methods that were unsound by today's standards, at least according to the official rulebook anyway. But it was a wild time, and with crime rates so incredibly high, they had to do what they had to do. Lawmen had to deal with bandits, outlaws, rowdy gamblers. Every day their life was on the line. Of course, some towns were safer than others, but the outlaw towns, those were the hardest to clean up. These were places ruled by criminals and corruption, so getting a place like that under control was no small task. And what made being a man of the law even more dangerous back then was how level the playing field was. Nowadays, cops can call in backup. They have way more heavy-duty equipment at their disposal to deal with crime, but in the Old West, the criminals were packing the same stuff the deputies were: 6-shooters and rifles for the most part. So you had to have some real skill with your piece. There's a reason why famous figures from the Old West era were usually renowned for their speed and accuracy with their sidearms. You were also trying to avoid death on a daily basis as a miner. Mining is still a dangerous job to this day, so back in the late 1800s, good luck. Health and safety was not the primary concern. The primary concern was doing everything possible to strike it rich. And that's the thing, for as dangerous as this line of work was, the risk to reward was pretty high. I mean, if you struck gold, you could be rich in an instant and never have to work again. It happened for some, but the majority of miners weren't so lucky. Not only was the danger of being trapped or crushed by falling rocks a constant threat, but a lot of miners suffered from poor health as well. For one thing, they worked very long hours, and mining is pretty grueling work, especially back then without the type of equipment we have today to assist in the process. Miners got sick more often than other folks because of all the dust in the mines. A good number of them would die of tuberculosis. So what if you just want to bartend? You know, serve some drinks while chatting up the townsfolk. Sure, you might have overly intoxicated patron or two to boot out of the place, but what else could go wrong, right? Well, if you've seen any Western movie before, you know that working in a saloon was not quite the same as working in a bar today. And even today, depending on the bar you're working at, things can get pretty hairy. So imagine what it would have been like for saloon owners in the Wild West. Having a firearm on hand was a must. So who were the clientele? Well, everyone else on this list, pretty much, and folks had a lot to deal with, so they were pretty high strung, you know, not always the most laid back. Sure, movies do embellish things, but saloon brawls and shootouts did happen. Even if things only went down a couple times over the course of a saloon owner's career, it would be too much. And depending on what town you were in, things would go down much more often than that. Alright, much like lawmen, bounty hunters were also dealing with violent criminals on a frequent basis. Bounty hunting could be lucrative, but it involved tracking pretty dangerous men and then dealing with them, either taking them into custody or killing them. And to say things got gnarly would be an understatement, not to mention the fact that these guys were sometimes traveling very long distances on horseback through scorching hot weather. That would get old pretty quickly. One of the most notorious bounty hunters in the Old West was Timothy Longhair Jim Courtright. He was a lawman as well, but the lines between these two gigs were often pretty blurred. Again, there was no official system in place. Now, alongside enforcing the law, Courtright ran his own protection service where he'd offer local businesses safety from thieves and vandals. But some business owners didn't like the fact that he'd try to strong-arm them into paying for his services. And one man, Luke Short, a saloon owner, ended up telling Courtright to, quote, "go to hell." This led to the two having a classic duel in the street. The two faced each other as the Ennio Morricone music kicked in. Whoever was quickest on the draw wouldn't die. Well, as renowned as Courtright was with his sidearm, this just wasn't his day. He took 3 bullets, one in the thumb, one in the right shoulder, and one right into the heart.
Number 5, the gold rush. Picture a billboard for the Wild Wild West, okay? What's on it right now? A cowboy tipping his hat in the corner with, 4 missing teeth, a sunset in the corner obviously, maybe a horse, and also a bunch of gold stacked up in a mine, right? Well, we've heard about the Wild West here and there, but was there really a massive gold rush? The California Gold Rush of 1849, despite what history commonly believes, wasn't the first big gold rush, not even close. The first one was back in 1799. A young man named Conrad Reed found this yellow rock right on his property. He had no idea what it was, and for years, he and his father John Reed used this rock as a door stopper. You already know where I'm going with this. This 17-pound nugget of gold, which is worth a lot even today, back then this information was game-changing. Congress then built the Charlotte Mint just so they could handle all this incoming gold found in North Carolina right after. Then later in 1828, more gold was discovered, but this time in Georgia. This was the second rush. Then come 1848, James Marshall found gold at Sutter's Mill, California. After the third one though, that's when the thousands moved out west. That one had the biggest pull. So it's pretty big, but not the first. Number 4, the OK Corral. The shootout at the OK Corral went down on October 26, 1881. It's known as the most famous shootout in history. But should it be? Really? Going back to Tombstone, Arizona, it's 3 p.m. and we have men of the law and of course outlaws all in the same block. So naturally, trouble ensues. There's not enough land here for all of us, some rootin' tootin' shit. There were about 8 men involved in the rumble, but it barely lasted 30 seconds. Also, it's important to note the gunfight at the OK Corral wasn't even at the OK Corral. It happened near the intersection of 3rd Street and Fremont Street, right behind the corral. Yeah, details matter. 3 lawmen were injured and 3 cowboys lost their lives. Yeehaw. That's a sad yeehaw for you guys. This is why you don't organize shootouts at 3 p.m. I don't know, everyone's drunk, there's bad decisions, apparently there's bad aim. Just slam some milk, shake some hands, go home. Simple. Number 3, Helena duels. So we talked about the bizarre ways folks would settle beef back then. They would slam tarantula juice and shoot animals from the top of locomotives, have a 30-second fist fight in the middle of the day, and then go home. But have you heard of these Helena duels? It began, of course, in Helena, Texas, aka the toughest town on earth, at least it was back in the 1800s. The Helena duel began here. There's even a movie called The Duel with Woody Harrelson and Liam Hemsworth. They show this style of combat in a pretty brutal Hollywood way. Both opponents had their left hands tied together with buckskin, and then each were given a small knife with an even smaller blade. It had to be short enough so it didn't reach any vital organ. That was the Texas trick. Then they're whirled around until they're dizzy, and then it gets really loud, really messy, and really bloody. Last man standing, pretty much. The crowd, of course, watches and places bets, which is always insane to me. I can't watch UFC sometimes. I don't like seeing things break, let alone a Helena duel. Catch me inside sipping milk, texting my ex. Hard pass, freaks. Number 2, train games. Entertainment was always a hit or miss when it comes to these historical lists. The Romans held gladiator battles with animals that drew in thousands of spectators from across the land. Well, in 1894, William Crush, a railwayman, had this event in mind that would for sure go down in history. Oh buddy, did it ever. William Crush wanted to secure the future of the railroad company in Missouri, Kansas, and Texas. And to do so, William made an entire temporary city appropriately named the city of Crush. Nice. There was a carnival for children to enjoy and all that jazz, but the main pull for adults was the train smash. The collision of 2 40-ton steam trains was meant to be the talk of the town. Look at these Goliaths as they smash, crush, into each other. How fun. Yeah, the trains collided, it worked, and the darndest thing happened. They blew up. Yeah, it's almost like they caused a disaster for popularity. Neat. 40,000 came in and many left injured. A couple of people sadly didn't leave at all. One survivor ended up getting 10 grand out of the deal. His name was J.C. Dean, and they lost their eye in the explosion, so the company gave them a lifetime railway pass. Just the thing you want right after that horrific event. Sorry about your eye, here's free PTSD as well, anytime you want. Enjoy. Crush was later rehired by the railway after it gained popularity. Yeah, this happened back then too. Somebody does something horrible, and then now all of a sudden they're famous. Hashtag chairgirl. Kicking off the list at number 10, medicine shows. Nowadays, medical shows are fascinating. Dr. Pimple Popper, I can weirdly watch that all day. There's something about animal rescues, home renovations, or chiropractic. adjustments, I could never be bored. So back in the Wild Wild West, the 1860s to the 1890s, they had medicinal showmen. Yeah, these guys would go town to town, of course selling elixirs and tonics, but they would really nail this pitch. They would have pawns run ahead and plant themselves in the audience for these random medicine shows. That way when the world's greatest showman doctor arrives, he randomly picks an ill patient and then boom, just like that, they would be cured. One of the most successful of these elixirs was an elixir made by Kickapoo Indian Medicines from John Healy and Charles Bigelow. It was a mixture of herbs, roots, and animal fat, said to treat any illness, but really it was more of just a laxative, so you were just in the bush and hoping it got better.
Number 9. Hop on my camel, partner. When you think of the Old West, you think long open ranges, spurs on boots, and cowboys riding camels? That's right, in 1855 the United States Army decided to import 75 camels to Texas. After all, the terrain in the Old West was fairly similar to the Middle East. The camels made supply runs between Camp Verde and San Antonio. But trouble began when the American Civil War broke out. Eventually the camels were sold off or simply let go into the wild, where they multiplied and began to cause havoc. So much so that folks began to spin urban legends such as the Red Ghost, a 30-foot tall creature that made people quiver in their britches. When in reality, most people had never seen a camel before and it was just a feral camel wandering the desert. But I mean, who knows? If Star Wars had a 30-foot camel in the snow, what's to say there isn't one running around in the American desert?
Number 8. Missing mines. There's billions of dollars worth of gold lost at the bottom of the sea. It's there right now, waiting for you. Yeah, I'm talking to you. But if you don't have goggles, maybe swimming just isn't your thing, no sweat. Try the West. Yeah, there's dozens of lost treasure troves hidden in mines still to this day, like the San Saba gold mine or the Wheelbarrow mine. There's a few we have heard from in literature from old maps, but none compared to the Lost Dutchman mine. The legend has it that a man named Jacob Waltz, a German prospector, found the richest gold mine in the world. That's what he told his friends, and would we ever lie to our friends about gold and the location for it? No, absolutely not. The first gold rush was back in 1799. A young man named Conrad Reed found this yellow rock, had no idea what it was, and for years he and his father used it as a doorstopper. Yeah, they used a 17-pound gold nugget as a doorstopper. Nice. Back then, this information was game-changing once they realized that it was, gold. So Congress then built the Charlotte Mint just so they could handle all this incoming gold found in North Carolina right afterwards. I just wouldn't have told anybody. I'd be like, is this an infinity stone? I'm just gonna pocket this and then head out east.
Number 7. Sideshow Crook. Elmer McCurdy was no different in life than any other bandit at the time. What makes McCurdy so unique is in his afterlife. McCurdy met his end on October 7, 1911, after local sheriffs tracked him down from a botched robbery. McCurdy was taken to an undertaker and prepared for burial. Unfortunately, no one came to claim the lonesome bandit. Not getting paid for his services, the undertaker began to display McCurdy as a sideshow attraction, charging patrons a nickel to view the bandit. The attraction became popular enough to draw the attention of carnival promoters, who offered multiple times to purchase the mummified crook, but were all denied. As the years went on, McCurdy changed hands from multiple sideshow attractions and museums. One day in 1976, a film crew was setting up props for filming. When someone began to move what they thought was a wax mannequin, it actually turned out to be poor old Elmer McCurdy himself. Eventually, McCurdy was laid to rest in a grave, where 2 feet of concrete were poured over his casket to make sure no one would come to steal the sideshow crook. Stay in the hole, partner.
Number 6. Cowboys and aliens. Long before the Roswell incident in New Mexico back in 1947, aliens might have actually visited us. Yeah, the report comes from 1896 from 2 men in California. They reported that 3 alien beings were trying to abduct them. Were these just cowboy pranksters? Maybe they had a few shots of whiskey from the saloon? No, one of them was a colonel. Colonel H.G. Shaw and Camille Spooner were going from the town of Lodi to the Fresno Citrus Fair, which honestly sounds like a wonderful time, just saying that. But en route, they were greeted by 7-foot-tall, slender aliens. Yeah, the aliens didn't end up taking the 2 men because they were too heavy. These aliens were too thin and weak. Legit, that was the reason. They just couldn't grab them and take off. So they got back into their spaceship and they took off. How embarrassing is that? Hit the gym, E.T.
Number 5. Comfort of the ladies of the evening. Now being that it's the Old West and there was just a shootout in the street, folks need to take their minds off of such horrors. Add into the mix long hard days tending fields and livestock, people need to take off some steam. The local saloon is there for that. However, like a hidden menu at McDonald's, there's some other activities a man can engage in that aren't perhaps a regular service. Who the hell am I kidding? Ladies of the evening were quite common back then, actually. Naturally, it was a very dangerous job. However, if anything good can come from that, it's that in some cases these women became very wealthy enough to become the madam of their own establishments. And in some other cases, these madams were using their wealth to invest back into their towns, like building schools, doctor's offices. Imagine getting treatment from something and the doctor says, "These bandages were brought to you by Madame Dover's Wicked Wizard Vacuum Double Sloshy Slush 9000. It's a great product, what can you say?
Number 4, interior decor. We've seen a Western saloon in movies. More often than not, it's the swinging door. You know, the classic, they always kick it in, boom, and dust everywhere and all over the place. Dust gets all on people's meals, the classic. You sort of need to kick those doors open, kind of, also. Because if you go through slow, it's just weird. It like pushes your clothes back. You need that cowboy momentum. In reality, there weren't a lot of swinging saloon doors. In fact, most saloons across the West were in pretty rough shape. They didn't look like a Tarantino set at all. They looked like that one pub in that one town that one time, you know? Just not clean, not clean at all. You ride by, you're like, is that still open? How is that still open? These saloons were tiny rooms. We had stools or chairs made of fur. You know, no one's running fish tacos to tables in the 1850s. It doesn't always smell like a nice pub. You don't see something go by and you go, ooh, what's that? I wanna have that. No, that doesn't happen here. One of the fanciest saloons has to be the White Elephant in Fort Worth, Texas. It was 2 stories and it served fresh fish and oysters. Apparently it was a lovely time.
Number 3, manifest destiny. The destiny of America. There's a famous poster somewhere. It's like an angel guiding the pioneers west. It's like pointing, doing something like that. Back to the history. What is manifest destiny? Well, for our non-American audience, it was this very core belief that since America had won its independence and begun expanding west, that they were destined to do so and keep expanding. And expanding. Why should the freedom train stop here, right? Coast to coast, baby. And maybe buy Alaska from Russia, since, well, they're not really using it. Okay, and maybe Hawaii. They got pineapples or something, I don't know. Alright, maybe even heavily influenced places that are beyond US borders. But all that American influence and imperialism starts here. Imagine being the pioneer who dared to venture west, like the Great Oregon Trail, or those who crossed the desert states. And some really religious folks that found a salty lake in the desert looked at their wives and said, I need at least 2 or 3 more. God bless America.
Number 2, mixologist. You ever go to a pub, like a chill pub, dare I say a restaurant, and a dude with a mustache thinks he's in Peaky Blinders for no reason behind the bar? He's flipping bottles that don't need to be flipped, he's lighting shots on fire. Guy, it's 12:45 in the afternoon. What's your soup of the day? Where did this come from, historically? Where did the cool bartender role come from? I'm trying to order a Cosmo, but he won't stop doing stunts. In the 1800s, bartenders were referred to as mixologists. They were top dog. They had to be. They were the fanciest guys in town. We're now doing impressions of these guys today, you know, with the bow tie, and we pour it in fancy ways, because around the late 1800s, saloon owners were growing rapidly. So now you needed to have something special, something unique for the town, like say a witty mixologist who can twirl his mustache as he pours a drink without looking. Great, now the town feels special, it feels unique. Manuals for bartenders came out around the 1860s, that's when things started to get more serious. A gentleman named Jerry Thomas published a guide called How to Mix All Kinds of Plain and Fancy Drinks. Today we still have that, but now it's a red sticky binder that says meal specs and Sharpie. It's not as fancy, but it gets the job done.
Number 1, dysentery. Nothing is more horrible, more awful than catching dysentery. Trust me, I would know. I never caught it, sometimes I get diarrhea. Anyway, in Oregon Trail, the very charming DOS game. Gotta love that DOS color palette. Eye-melting cyan and violet, nice. This text-based adventure game, however, is grounded in some truth, as we can all imagine this wasn't a time of great cleanliness. Dysentery, typhoid, cholera, malaria, or more commonly known as yellow fever, and even scurvy, which you usually associate that with pirates, but cowboys got it too. Which, given the conditions of the Old West, makes for a not so fruit-friendly environment. So yeah, it does make sense. Sadly for cowboys, prospectors, and everyone in between, there was a good chance you would lay down with a headache, and then the rest of your posse would have to lay you down forever. In the ground, partner.
Starting our list off at number 10, a banker. Today, online banking is easy, right? It's a little bit too invasive at times. I don't know. I get an email from my bank. It's like, Mr. McWaters, do you want to provide for your family? I'm like, Chill, relax. Back in the Old West, you didn't get a courtesy check-in email. You didn't have overdraft. In fact, the United States national banking system, well, it didn't even exist until 1863. Before then, you'd have what were called wildcat banks. And, well, these were pretty fun. Here we go. What they would do is wildcat banks, they would take deposits for a short amount of time, collect your life savings, and then unannounced randomly, they would disappear overnight. Just take all your money and then run for the woods. How horrible is that? Imagine going to the bank the next day and it's gone. The bank's just not there. You're standing there with a card. Like, hello? Where did I put this in? You're telling me they pretended to be bankers for months at a time? Fake mustache, oh hello sir, good morning. Stamping things that aren't even real. They did all of that and then they just ran away with all of your money. That's wild. I get it now. I get it. The Wild West. After 1863, a noble profession was to work at a bank, you know, and not screw people over for thousands of dollars. The Hudson Bay Company, Wells Fargo, these are all names that began because of these fake Looney Tune wildcat banks. So next time you see your bank call, be thankful. Don't be stressed, be thankful. They've got your back. They're not gonna run away overnight. Number 9, ranch work. Alrighty, I can't do yard work. I don't know if you can tell by my physical being, but I can't lift a brick. My back doesn't allow me to reach the floor. A weird curve in the back, I don't know. Pulling weeds physically hurts my soul. Or maybe I'm just lazy. One of the two, I don't know. Either way, the Old West would have been the end of Taylor McWaters. To be a cowboy, it meant lots and lots of ranch work. It wasn't all yees and haws and kicking around. A lot of the time you were protecting your cattle. That's stressful, right? All that meat just sitting there in the 1800s, good luck. Cowboys earned between $25 to $40 a month. Yeah, which sounds laughable now, but today that would be around $1,500 a month, which is fine. I mean, for a cowboy, I don't know, it's a bit less than. Do cowboys get sick days? Probably not. They probably just get sick. Number 8, railroad work. This is one of the few jobs from the Old West that I actively see every single day coming to work. Living downtown, they're always adding trains and bridges and not finishing any of them. And ideally, you don't want any toxic substance traveling down those lines, right? Fingers crossed. Well, back in the Old West, railroads were meant to assist the booming mining and ranching industries. Thing is, there weren't enough hands. There was not enough to keep up with the rate that they needed to. Like, who's gonna build a railroad? You know, who was the first person? Railroad workers, monthly, you'd make around $1,000, and this brought a wave of immigrants to the West. The Union Pacific and the Central Pacific Railroads, they all lay over 1,700 miles. Now, making this actual railroad, it destroyed the bodies of these workers, but without it, American history would not be the same. Couldn't imagine making a railroad. That is exhausting. Number 7, blacksmith. All right, close your eyes and imagine a blacksmith. Just any blacksmith from any time. Is he bald? Does he have a massive beard? Is he incredibly strong and wildly intimidating? Yeah, that checks out. That's what a lot of them look like. Missing teeth, banging something pretty loud, that's a blacksmith. Frontier times were almost a golden time for blacksmiths, believe it or not. Hammers, horseshoes, new railroads, it checks out. No, they didn't need any chainmail, but a saddle wouldn't hurt, that's for sure. We could use a saddle. They would earn up to $200 a day. Blacksmiths were always busy in the Old West. They doubled as auto repair services really at the same time. I mean, I don't know. A guy comes in with a busted up carriage. Well, now you're a mechanic. Yeah, go fix this wooden car. Good luck, you have one day. Here's 10 bucks. Number 6, journalism. Believe it or not, the newspaper business cleaned up shop back in the frontier. Everyone wanted to know what the tea was. Tucson, Arizona, for example, back in the day, back in 1831, that one town had 5 different newspapers. Yeah, even though there are only 465 residents, there were 5 different papers. That's stressful. How do you keep up with that much news? I mean, to be fair, before radio and television, yeah, there's probably lots to talk about all day long. That's pretty much all you can do, just talk all day long, so I get it. The industry provided jobs as well. It's very much like YouTube. Here, there's writers, there's hosts, the design and print staff, we have editors. It was a little easier than laying down a railroad, that's for sure. So when it came to jobs, yeah, journalism wasn't that bad. Definitely better than doing anything that has to do with this motion, that's for sure.
Number 5, blacksmith. I love playing Stardew Valley, and Clint from Stardew is the best, but it always made me wonder, how does one even get into blacksmithing? Well, being a blacksmith in the Wild West was a vital but demanding occupation. Alongside with the mining and prospecting, blacksmiths played a crucial role in the development of frontier communities, providing essential services such as forging tools, repairing equipment, and contributing to the growth of local economies. However, the life of a blacksmith was not without its challenges and risks, as working with hot metal, sharp tools, and heavy machinery, the risk of burn, cuts, and injuries from handling red-hot iron and heavy equipment was ever present. Sparks and fragments of hot metal created during the forging process could pose a risk to the eyes, as they didn't have proper, equipment, and without modern safety equipment, as I mentioned, blacksmiths were vulnerable to these eye injuries from flying debris. In the event of injuries or health issues, blacksmiths might not have had immediate or adequate medical attention, and despite the risks, of course, blacksmiths were highly valued members of frontier communities, contributing to the local economy and development of essential tools and equipment. And of course, you do need a blacksmith if you're a cowboy cattle driver. Number 4. The iconic image of a cowboy is often associated with a sense of adventure and independence, but the reality of the job came with numerous challenges and risks. However, I'd like to clarify, the image of cowboys in the American West is often associated with Euro-American cultural context, but it's essential to recognize that various indigenous people also had their own traditions of cattle herding and horse riding. Indigenous cowboys, often referred to as cowboys or horsemen, played significant roles in the ranching and livestock industries, contributing to the culture and economic developments of their communities. Before the arrival of Europeans, indigenous people in what is now Mexico and the southwestern United States had well-established traditions of horse riding and cattle herding. The Navajo Nation, located in the southwestern United States, had a long history of horsemanship, and the Navajo people traditionally relied on horses for transportations and herding livestock, including sheep and cattle. And of course, when it comes to being on the job, as this is what this video is on, I have to bring up the history. Outbreaks of illnesses such as Texas fever could devastate cattle herds, leading to economic losses and ranchers and cowboys. Number 3, railroad worker. Again, do not be surprised when we talk about Wild West. I gotta bring up the whole racism part because it was a thing, as it is a thing now, whether you believe it or not. To some, when they think about railroad workers, they think of big burly guys with giant sledgehammers on the side of the tracks. But to me, I think about how the majority of the railroad workers were Chinese immigrants that came to the United States, who at the time were treated with extreme work conditions that constantly risked their lives. Chinese railroad workers faced hazardous working conditions during the construction of the railroad, as they were involved in physically demanding tasks such as grading, tunneling, and laying the tracks, often in challenging terrains and extreme weather conditions. They are forced to live in close quarters, facilitated with the spread of diseases such as cholera and smallpox, posing health risks to the workers. And of course, they face a discrimination and racial prejudice from other workers, local communities, and sometimes even from their own employers. This discrimination could lead to verbal abuse, harassment, and unfair treatment, as the Chinese workers often receive lower wages than their non-Chinese counterparts for similar or identical work. The pay disparities reflected discriminatory practices prevalent during the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, as well as lived in isolated and segregated camps. Again, this is part of history, whether you want it to or not, or acknowledge it, but it's there if anyone wants to look into it, and I do suggest you do look into it. Number 2, miner. One of the most significant risks of being an underground miner was the potential of a tunnel collapsing and cave-ins. Poorly supported mine shafts and tunnels could collapse, and burying miners under tons of rocks and debris. Mines were susceptible to fires, especially in coal mines where flammable gases could accumulate anytime, and miners were exposed to dust, fumes, and toxic gases, leading to respiratory issues such as pneumoconiosis, as well as other lung disorders. Loose rocks and debris in mine shafts poses a constant danger, and rock falls and accidents involving hoisting equipment or elevator systems could lead to injuries or fatalities. During the Wild West era, safety regulations and measures were often insufficient, and miners had limited access to safety equipment. And employers were not always diligent in implementing measures to protect their workers. Some mining processes involved in the use of hazardous chemicals such as mercury and cyanide. Exposure to these substances could lead to long-term health issues for miners and environmental damage. And finally, number 1, being a gambler or an outlaw. Being a gambler or an outlaw in the Wild West was a risky and often dangerous lifestyle. While popular culture has romanticized the heck of the image of gamblers and outlaws, the reality involved numerous challenges and hazards. Cheating was not uncommon in gambling establishments, and accusations of cheating could lead to violent confrontations. Disputes over winnings and losses sometimes escalated into violent weapon fights or physical altercations. For outlaws, where by definitions individuals who operated outside the law, this meant that they were constantly pursued by law enforcement, including sheriffs, deputies, and posses. The risk of arrest and incarceration was a constant threat, and outlaws often engaged in violent activities, including bank robberies, stagecoach holdups, and pew-pew fights. This lifestyle exposed them to the risk of injury or death in shootouts, with lawmen or rival gangs. If caught by law enforcement, outlaws faced the risk of imprisonment. Conditions in the frontier jails were often harsh, and sentence could be severe. Outlaws who gained notoriety often became public enemies, or public enemy number 1, with bounties on their head, and this increased the risk of capture and heightened law enforcement's efforts to bring them to justice.
Number 10, bank robberies. Okay, when we hear about the wild, rootin' tootin' Wild West, whatever, we think of outlaws like Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch, the James Younger Gang. Apparently, it was just bank robbery central back then. Just a lot of this and tapping and riding horses and stuff. That's really not true. Bank bank robberies didn't happen that often in real life. In fact, during the Wild West era, officially declared from 1865 to 1900, there were only 8 bank robberies. 8. That many years ago, along 15 western states, there were only 8. To put that in perspective, in 2017 alone, there were roughly 4,000 bank robberies in the United States. Much more than 8. The first armed robbery ever in history was done by the famous outlaw Jesse James and his brother Frank. This went down in 1866. The gang of outlaws robbed the Clay County Savings Association in Liberty, Missouri. Fun rootin' tootin' history. Number 9. Camels. My favorite actor growing up, hands down, was Woody from Toy Story. The guy's physical comedy was on point. And no, I don't mean Tom Hanks. I mean Woody. With this crazy little cowboy run, tipping his hat. But what's a cowboy without his horse, right? As soon as Bullseye got introduced in Toy Story 2, the picture was complete. A cowboy and a horse. We've seen this combo at some point in our lives. Everywhere. But did you know that for around 100 years, camels were part of Texas wildlife? So imagine a cowboy on a camel. Yeah, that's real. That happened. Imagine 2 cowboys on the humps of a camel. How silly and intimidating would that look? Back in 1855, Congress spent thousands to purchase and ship feral camels from Egypt. The hot Southwest would make sense when it comes to camels doing their camel thing. But by 1857, the army had 70 camels. Things were going well until, you know, the Civil War happened, and then the camels escaped and all that madness, and then from then on, for 100 years or so, they bred and roamed Texas. Yeehaw, on a camel, have fun. Number 8, cowboys. Alright, since we're talking about cowboys, let's really talk about cowboys. Who were these guys? Was everybody just a cowboy off the bat, or did you have to earn it like a knight? What's the deal here? Well, the guys that we picture in our brain, like Woody, those are cattle herders, and then buffalo, thousands of them, they would roam the land to eat and find water. They would travel miles away, so the herders would follow on horseback and then drive them back to their ranch. They mostly ate beans, dried meat, obviously, and a lot of coffee. Those are the 3 main ingredients of yeeing and hawing. Am I a cowboy? I love beans and coffee. Coffee beans? Don't even get me started. A classic Western outfit was the denim jeans and chaps, the leather covers that, go over your legs. The large rim hats were called Stetsons. Aside from looking cool, they were large enough to keep the sun out of your eyes. That hat would also double down as a drinking bowl for their horse. Sharing is caring. Number 7, the Bison Express. Humans are responsible for the disappearance on many, many wild animals in one way or another. It's usually our fault. Yeah, going back to the Wild Wild West, the year 1869 specifically, that's when the Pacific Railroad was done. It was open to the West to all these explorers, but now they were whipping across these wild lands in record speed, passing hundreds of bison every single trip. Eventually, it didn't take long for these railroads to advertise hunting excursions on these trains. So yeah, guests would climb aboard the top of the train cars and hunt on the top of the trains. Yeah, on the top they would just shoot these animals for sport. Obviously the train couldn't stop and go back for the bodies, so they would just leave them. This one man, Orlando Bond, nicknamed the Brick, he apparently shot thousands himself. He rode the express so many times his rifle caused him to go deaf in one ear. This was done purposely to deprive Native Americans of their food supply. Now our bison's number are incredibly low, something like 2% of what it once was, and humans, well, we're still pretty garbage. What do you know? Number 6, alcohol. These saloons cowboys would visit, was there a bouncer? Did you need 2 pieces of ID? What was the drinking age back then? Well, besides the swinging saloon doors, it really wasn't a fun time at all. Alcohol back then, first of all, was basically just poison. Actually, it was literally poison sometimes. They had whiskey like 40 rods and Tao's Lightning. You have a couple of those and you're literally passing out in minutes. Nobody was getting cut off in old-timey saloons. The bartender wasn't like, hey, how about a water, buddy? Let's get you home. No, it was a show. They had this one drink on bar rail called tarantula juice. Yeah, happy 21st birthday. Go throw up. It was made from strychnine, which was actual poison. So when the whiskey wore off, the strychnine would be left over in the patron's body, and it felt like tarantulas were crawling all over your skin. Ugh, yeah, I'm good with a Bud Light Lime. Thanks, man.
Alright, how about being a cowboy? This would have been a pretty cool job, right? With how iconic and romanticized cowboys have become in American culture. Well, there was decent money to be made doing this, and I'm sure it came with some glory, but that also meant danger. A cowboy in the Old West worked on ranches, managing cattle and horses. Their main job was to take care of the livestock, which included feeding them, herding them across vast distances, and protecting them from bandits. Cowboys would move cattle from the ranches where they were raised to the nearest railroads where they would be shipped off. Cowboys spent most of their days outdoors, riding horses for long hours, traveling through difficult terrain, and like I said before, they had to be vigilant against cattle rustlers who might try to steal their livestock. Working on the railroad was also not an easy task, but it was essential to America's expansion. Railroad workers, sometimes known as Gandy dancers, had the task of laying the rails that would connect the vast expanse of the West with the more developed regions in the East. They do everything from clearing land and digging tunnels to building bridges and laying down heavy steel tracks. The conditions were often brutal. They handled primitive and heavy machinery, used explosives to blast through rock, and just like with mining, they didn't have the type of equipment we have today. They did all this stuff by hand in remote, harsh environments. Accidents, injuries, they were all happening constantly, and in terms of weather, workers could find themselves in really cold or scorching weather. Health risks were another serious concern. Diseases were easily spread through densely packed work camps with poor sanitation, and on top of all that, a lot of these workers were immigrants, so discrimination was also a constant. Stagecoach drivers had one main worry on their minds: bandits. Stagecoaches were like the buses and delivery trucks of the day. Most were used to transport people, but sometimes they also carried goods. Drivers needed to be good with horses and know the best routes to take, all while dealing with rough, often dangerous roads. But robberies were again a constant risk. Bandits and highwaymen targeted stagecoaches for the valuable cargo or personal belongings of the passengers on board. Drivers had to be very vigilant, and being armed again, it was just a must. It's not like they had police patrolling around either. They were traveling through desolate stretches of land. If they got into a bad situation, they were probably going to be on their own. And aside from being robbed, the routes they traveled were filled with natural obstacles. They might have to cross rivers, climb steep mountain paths, or navigate through bad weather. Much like stagecoach drivers, working on trains in the Wild West came with its fair share of danger, especially from train robberies, which were a real and frequent threat. Back then, trains were basically moving targets. They carried not just people, but valuable goods and money, often in the form of gold and silver. Trains may have well just had "Rob Me" written in giant letters on the side of them. One of the most notorious figures associated with train robberies was Butch Cassidy. He was part of a gang known as the Wild Bunch. These guys were infamous for pulling off some of the most daring and well-planned train heists of the time. Cassidy and his crew would carefully plan their attacks. They often involved dynamite to blow up safes, and a good deal of fire was involved. These incidents would have been terrifying. Cassidy, though, was kind of known for being less brutal than most other robbers, who would not hesitate to use their weapons. For train conductors and other crew, the threat of a robbery was something they always had to be prepared for. What about bankers, though? I mean, they have one of the most mundane jobs on the face of the planet. Well, even in the Wild West, this was actually a relatively safe job, but just because they weren't dealing with danger on a daily basis doesn't mean they never had to deal with it. This was a time where outlaws and bandits were running rampant, after all, and being a banker means, well, I mean, you're working at a place that stores all the money. Not hard to connect the dots here. Being robbed by a gang of rowdy outlaws was always a very real possibility, and surviving one of these robberies was unlikely. There were criminals, again, like Butch Cassidy, who tried to pull off robberies with as little killing as possible, but that really wasn't the norm. And I can't talk about the dangerous professions of the Wild West without bringing up outlaws themselves. Hard to really call being an outlaw a job, but it was how a lot of folks made their living. And in terms of danger, well, most of the time they were the danger, but as I discussed earlier with bounty hunters and lawmen, they were sometimes even more brutal than the bandits they were protecting their citizens from. And on top of being constantly on the run from the law, Outlaws didn't always get along with each other. Just like today, there were rival gangs, and even members of the same crew would turn on each other if they could profit from it. There's no honor amongst thieves, they say. Take even the most famous outlaw in the Wild West, Jesse James. He was taken out by one of his own guys, Robert Ford. Ford walked right up behind him while he was adjusting a crooked painting on the wall and fired right into the back of Jesse James's head. Being an outlaw was probably the riskiest job of all. They always had the element of surprise on their hands during robberies and such, but pretty much everyone was packing. Most outlaws would be lucky to end up behind bars. Most met their end at the hands of a bullet.
Kicking off the list at number 10, going the distance. First things first, how much was an IPA back in the 1800s? That's why we clicked this video, right? That's all we want to know. Some beers today cost like $13 at the bar. What's going on? Nowadays we have happy hour, drink specials, wine pairing suggestions that go along with your meal. We have affordable alternatives today at the bar. Back in the 1850s, saloons would price their drinks depending on how far away you had to travel to get there. Isn't that wild? In the Yukon, their shots of whiskey were like 50 cents a pop. That was a lot of money back in the day. If you were to ask for the same drink in a local saloon, say in Colorado, you could get numerous beverages for the same price. And as you would expect, the fancier the establishment, the more you'll spend. But either way, it's not going to be comfortable.
Number 9, manure everywhere. The 1800s were changing times, especially on the western frontier. Cities were being built, America was under reconstruction, and if you see my video on the 1800s technology, then you know how things were about to get a little wild. Except something I want to talk about today is, well, it's gonna drive moms and wives nuts across the country. How many times have you told your husband or the kids to wipe off their feet before coming into the house? Or stop wearing their shoes in the house? Right? It's the worst. I'm sorry, Mom. Okay, but imagine that, except everyone is bringing in their muddy, bloody, and manure-covered boots into the house. Horses and livestock were just a part of everyday life. That means droppings, or road apples, as they're so commonly called. The smell alone on a hot summer day could make any cowboy turn green. I think I'm going to puke, Dad.
Number 8, no stools. Okay, this one's for all the bartenders out there. I see you. I respect you. Bar seating is vital. You get your regulars coming in. Joan with the limp, she's so nice. She's always so nice every day. Always gets a grilled cheese. She's the best. Always a smile on her face. Individuals who want to grab a bite and read the paper, obviously they don't need to take up an entire table for 8, so you have spots at the bar. It's ideal. We're used to this. But back in the Western days, bar stools just weren't a thing. Bar spots it didn't exist. You couldn't sit and vent to your local barkeep about why your ex hasn't texted you back. They didn't have stools at the bar. They just had the rail at the bottom for your foot. Just that little bar rail there for the little lean right there. A nice cowboy lean. Yeah, I'll just eat fish and chips standing up leaning. Awesome. Just the thing you want after walking in the sun all day long. A foot rail.
Number 7, duels at high noon. Let me paint a picture for you, partner. It's a warm summer night, and you find yourself sitting at a card table in a saloon that's named after a barnyard animal. The piano is blasting a ragtime tune as waiters bustle about, serving drinks to unruly cowboys that fill the establishment. In front of you are 3 unsavory characters, each more than the next. As the night goes on, so do the poker chips. And when one gentleman ain't taking kindly to his losses, some insults about each other's mothers are exchanged. A powerful slap reaches the man across the poker table, matching the energy of Will Smith at an Oscar night. Too soon? I don't know.
Wow, West.
Wow, West. That's when it's settled. Tomorrow at high noon, they're gonna settle this like gentlemen. A duel at noon with guns. That's how they did it. Does it get any more classic than that? I don't think so, folks. The clock strikes noon, and only one outlaw remains, and he's married to Jada Smith.
Number 6, only talking. Here we go. You ever go to a bar, you're having a nice time, you and your pals order some Caesar salads for the table, the night is now well on its way, we're feeling good. Then 10 o'clock hits and you see a band start to set up. Okay, game time decision. Do we settle up and leave before they start? Or do we give them a chance, end up feeling bad, and feel obligated to stay until the very end at 3 a.m.? It's tough. Usually the latter ends up happening. Back in the 1800s, we didn't have to worry about such an issue. Most of the time, these saloons were just for business. The odd time you would have poker, dice, a piano perhaps would be in the room with some jazzy fingers making an appearance. But when saloons first popped up in Wyoming back in 1822, most of the time it was for lawmen, miners, gamblers, just pure business. Not many blind dates happening in booth 16, you know what I mean?
Number 5, Romeo and Juliet. What's in a name that which we call a rose? Any other word would smell as sweet? It's often said that art imitates life, but sometimes life can be stranger than fiction, and oftentimes really similar. The Hatfield and McCoys were two feuding families in the time of the Old West, whose hatred of one another runs deep. The most serious issues being family members removed, Old West style, by the opposite family, and in one case, a court battle over the ownership of a barnyard pig. But perhaps the best story to come of this feud is the love affair of John C. Hatfield and Rosanna McCoy. The two lovers met and instantly fell in love with each other, their families instantly disapproving of their newfound love. Similar to William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, the star-crossed lovers' story ends in tragedy. After multiple attempts to rekindle their love, including a daring rescue organized by Rosanna to free John C. from her own family, their love never resparked, and John C. went on to marry her cousin. It's said that poor Rosanna died of a broken heart. He loves me not. He loves me, he loves my cousin?
Number 4, bank robberies. If you're going to parody the Wild Wild West, you need a horse, you need a hat, and you need a big sack with a $sign on it. Apparently, wasn't it like Bandit Central? Weren't there bank robberies on every dusty corner in every dusty old town? No, there actually was very little, in fact. Bank robberies didn't happen that often back then. In fact, during the Wild West era, officially declared from 1865 to 1900, there were only 8 bank robberies in total. To put that in perspective, in 2017 alone, there were around 4,000 bank robberies in the United States. So it got a lot worse after the Wild Wild West. Now we're on like Wild, it's like 17 wilds at this point. The first armed robbery ever in history was done by famous outlaw, you may have heard of them, Jesse James and his brother Frank. This was in 1866. The gang of outlaws robbed the Clay County Savings Association in Liberty, Missouri. We know all these bandits, but it's like they're just robbers, they're just bad people. We shouldn't really know them or glorify them. But they do this and ride horses, so it's kind of fun.
And the number 3 spot, Good Bad Town. On your way out west, you may come to find that the unsettled lands are full of danger, bandits, crooks, perilous weather, and the occasional tummy ache. When the town of Palisade, Nevada's railroad was expanded and people began to arrive in droves, the town boomed, but so did their boredom. Palisade was rather mild compared to the rest of the expanding West, so much so that when tourists began to complain of Palisade being nothing like the dangerous towns they read about in their dime novels, the people of Palisade acted by staging fake bank robberies, gunfights, and even Native American battles between them and the army, with sometimes the Native Americans participating. Also going as far as using real cattle blood during the staged combat. The citizens of Palisade were such effective actors that a lot of tourists began to run back to the train in fear of what they were seeing. Nothing more American than capitalizing on boredom.
Number 2, Helena duels. Have you guys heard of Helena duels? They're pretty intense. They're a bit more intense than breakdancing battles, which honestly it's pretty close, but these are like right above it. Helena duels began of course in Helena, Texas, aka the toughest town on earth. At least that's what they called it back in the late 1800s. It still is pretty close. The Helena duel began here. There's even a movie called The Duel with Woody Harrelson and Liam Hemsworth. They showed this style of combat in a pretty brutal cinematic way. Opponents' left hands were tied together with buckskin and each were given a small little blade. It had to be short enough so you couldn't reach any vital organ. That was the trick. It was a brutal detail that made this an unusual event. But just like the Romans and the Colosseum, everybody likes watching violence. Depending what era it is, people are like, yeah, we'll still show up and watch people die, sure. People would make bets during these duels. How did anybody watch these at all? I can't even scroll through Reddit at night without seeing something awful, let alone a Helena duel at like 4 p.m.
And the number 1 spot, I don't like your snoring, partner. There were a handful of dangerous criminals back in the Wild West. This includes John Wesley Hardin. Born to a reverend in 1853, his parents hoped he would grow up to be a preacher. He turned out to be one of the most deadliest outlaws to ever live. Hardin claimed many lives over the years, but most bizarre was when he shot a man for snoring. One night in 1871, while staying at a hotel, Hardin was having trouble sleeping due to the man in the next room snoring loudly. Hardin promptly shouted at the man to stop snoring. Irritated with no response, he fired several shots into the next room, claiming the man's life. After years of being an outlaw and spending a lot of time in jail, he was released for good behavior, where he then received a full pardon. With his full pardon, Hardin was then able to take and pass the bar exam, afterwards setting up a law practice in Gonzales County, Texas. If your lawyer has a longer criminal history than you, there's a good chance you're not going to beat the case.
Express rider. Now, if you're a Pony Express rider, which is a very interesting title, in the 1860s, it was a demanding and perilous job. The Pony Express was a short-lived but iconic mail delivery service that operated between the east and west coast of the United States. While the Pony Express played a crucial role in communication during its brief existence, riders faced numerous risks and challenges. Pony Express riders covered vast distances across diverse and often treacherous terrains, including mountains, deserts, and open plains. The varied landscapes presented challenges such as a rough trail and steep hills and unpredictable weather conditions, and the need for speed in delivering mail meant that the riders had little time for rest. They had to cover approximately 75 to 100 miles in a single ride before handing off the mail to the next rider. This demanding schedule meant limited opportunities for sleep or breaks. Riding at high speeds across rough terrains increased the risks of accidents and injuries, falls, collisions with obstacles, or injuries from hostile encounters that were constant concerns for Pony Express riders. The life expectancies of a Pony Express rider was relatively short, though, due to the challenging conditions and risks associated with the job. As many riders were young and adventurous, while the job offered excitement, it also took a very huge toll on their health and well-being. Number 9, farmer and rancher. Being a rancher in the Wild West was a challenging and often risky occupation. Ranchers played a vital role in the development of the western frontier, contributing to the cattle industry and the expansion of settlements. However, they faced numerous challenges and risks, both in terms of natural environment and the social and economic conditions of the time. Cattle rustling was a prevalent crime in the Wild West. Outlaws and bandits would steal cattle, posing a direct threat to the economic livelihood of ranchers. Ranchers often had to take the measures of protecting their herds and property, and conflicts could arise. Many ranchers were located in remote areas with limited access to infrastructure and services, and the expansion of ranches often encroached on traditional Native American territories. Tensions and conflicts between ranchers and Native American tribes were not uncommon, adding to an additional layer of risks to the occupation. But then again, I'm always on the Indigenous people's side, so they had a point to fight. Beyond weather-related challenges, ranchers were vulnerable to disasters and natural disasters such as floods, earthquakes, and disease outbreaks among livestock. These events could have devastating effects on both the ranchers as well as their herds. Number 8, saloon owner and the bartender. If you wanted a career as a saloon owner or a bartender in the Wild West, well, like all occupations in this time came with its own set of risks and challenges. Saloons were central to the social and economic life of a frontier town, but they also associated with a range of issues including lawlessness, violence, and economic uncertainties. Saloons were often rowdy establishments where patrons engaged in heavy drinking, gambling, and occasional brawls, and saloon owners, bartenders faced the risks of violence erupting within their establishments, leading to injuries as well as property damage. As well, some saloons attracted these outlaws and criminals seeking refuge or engaging in legal activities. Saloon owners could find themselves entangled with criminal events, leading to legal troubles and conflicts with law enforcement. Bartenders worked long hours in often challenging conditions, and dealing with unruly patrons, managing inventory, and maintaining a clean and safe environment were constant tasks that required skills and resilience that are still very prevalent today for current bartenders. Number 7, stagecoach driver. Stagecoaches were prime targets for bandits and highwaymen looking to rob passengers or steal valuable cargo. Drivers and passengers faced a constant risk of being ambushed alongside isolated stretches of the route. Stagecoach routes traverse diverse landscapes, including mountains, deserts, and dense forest. Drivers had to navigate rough and sometimes hazardous terrains, dealing with obstacles such as steep inclines and rocky paths, and river crossings. Stagecoach drivers were exposed to the elements and had to contend with extreme weather conditions, including scorching heat, freezing temperatures, heavy rain, and snowstorms. These conditions made traveling challenging and added an extra layer of risk, and the stagecoach drivers worked long and grueling hours, covering vast distances in a single journey. The demanding schedule and physical toll of driving for extended period increased the risk of fatigue and related accidents, but despite the risks, stagecoach drivers almost fell down here, oh my god. But despite the risks, stagecoach drivers played a crucial role in the westward expansion of the United States, connecting isolated communities and contributing to economic development of the frontier. Number 6, prospector and gold seeker. Being a prospector or gold seeker during the gold rush era in the Wild West was an adventurous but a very risky pursuit. It was obviously a huge time where gold was everyone's mind, and the allure of striking it and rich attracted thousands of individuals to mining sites in search of gold and other valuable minerals. However, the life of a prospector came with numerous challenges and hazards. Mining sites were often located in remote and isolated areas far from established communities. Prospectors faced the risk of being cut off from civilization with limited access to supplies, medical assistance, or communication, and the challenging terrain and harsh weather conditions added to the physical demands of the job. Mining camps were notorious for poor sanitations and crowding living conditions. Prospectors were also at risk of contracting diseases such as dysentery, cholera, and other illnesses due to inadequate hygiene practices and limiting access to clean water. The process of extracting minerals from the earth involved potentially dangerous activities such as tunneling, blasting, and handling heavy machinery. Accidents such as cave-ins, explosions, or equipment failures could also lead to injuries or fatalities.
Number 5. Mining. A study done at a mine in Butte, Montana found that miners were dying from tuberculosis. A lot, like 10 times more than they should be. Not should be, but you get what I'm saying. The mining industry is crazy dangerous. Safety was often overlooked and the health of these miners was, well, non-existent at the time. The first gold rush was back in 1799. This kicked off everything. A young man named Conrad Reed, he found this bright yellow rock. He had no idea what it was, and for years, he and his father, John Reed, actually used it as a door stopper. Yeah, this 17-pound nugget of gold just keeping a swift breeze rolling through. It's worth a bit more than a door stopper today, and this actually ended up changing the entire industry. Gold mining got so popular that Congress had to build the Charlotte Mint just so they could handle all this incoming gold found in North Carolina alone. It's pretty cool. You have to make a mint? That's how much money you're making? Buddy, I want a mint. Number 4, law enforcement. Of course, this too was a little different back in the Old West. There are not many body cams back then, I'll tell you that for free. Movies and television, they like to show the Old West as a lawless, rootin' tootin' time, and while sure, some of that is true, it wasn't as terrible as we think. Like A Million Ways to Die in the West, Red Dead Redemption, it wasn't that crazy because before any formal law enforcement agency did pop up, everybody was a bounty hunter, right? Why not? There's nothing else to do. Go lay a bunch of bricks or go catch a bad guy. 50-50, both are quite dangerous. Eventually, positions like that of a US Marshal began to pop up more and more, and well, now there's a bit more order to the system, that's for sure. A bit, just a little bit. Number 3, barkeep. Alright, I love pubs, big old fan of pubs. Never been to a Wild West rootin' tootin' pub, but I'm in no rush. They always have weird drinks like venom snake juice or whatever, like spider ale. I'm like, I don't want any of these poisons. How about a beer? Just a beer, thanks. Bars in the Wild West, not so fun. Not a lot of open mics going on back then in the 1800s. No karaoke night back then. See, back then, these saloons were just for business. That's it. You don't have a mustache and a business plan, get out. In the 1850s, saloons would price their drinks depending on how far away you had to travel. Can you imagine that? In the Yukon, their shot of whiskey was 50 cents a pop. Now, that was a lot back in the day, but if you were to ask for the same drink in a local saloon, say in, I don't know, Colorado, it'd be a lot cheaper. Pretty ruthless. That's rootin' tootin' ruthless. The odd time you would have poker, dice, maybe some guy in a piano with some jazz fingers, sure, but most of the time, business only. When saloons first popped up in Wyoming back in 1822, most of the time, it was only reserved for lawmen, miners, or gamblers. If you don't have any of those three, you're thirsty. Go gamble. Go grab a dice and come back. Number 2, resurrectionalist. Yeah, you don't see a lot of these guys around anymore, eh? Wonder where they all went. A resurrectionalist is exactly what it sounds like. It's very gross. You're trying to bring someone back to life, I guess. Not really. These guys were responsible for digging up dead bodies, and then they would sell them to medical schools in the West. Now, remind you, this was the late 1820s, so yeah, it was fine, I guess. This practice began in Edinburgh, Scotland. The medical science community was on the up and up, but in order to study new medicines, you know, to avoid the next plague or the next toxin rolling through your system, they needed these guys to come in and do the dirty work. Today, the medical community is a bit different. We're a bit, you know, smarter with things, but hey, never say never. A resurrectionalist might come back to life and be a new profession. How ironic. And finally, number 1, medicinal showmen. Yes, we'll end on this note. Step right up and see something that doesn't work. A fake product. Yes, here we go. I'm doing a fake shoe. A fake shoot? A fake show. I don't know. Back in the Wild West, the 1860s to the 1890s specifically, they had what's called medicinal showmen, right? You won't believe your eyes. You have strep throat? Come on up. Here we go. Definitely gonna fix that. These guys would go town to town selling elixirs and tonics, whatever, but it was all about the pitch. That's pretty much all they had. They would have pawns, like their buddies, run ahead into town and then plant themselves in the audience before these random medicine shows. That way, when the world's greatest showman doctor arrives, he randomly picks an ill patient that he knew was there, and then boom, just like that, he's cured. Almost like a magic show, right? Some would think, full of lies. One of the most successful of these elixirs was the elixir made by John Healy and Charles Bigelow. It was a mixture of herbs, roots, and animal fat, and it was wildly popular. They toured with this elixir. They had to tell everybody in every town. They said it could treat any illness, but in reality, it was just a laxative, just a mess, just a show, really. So don't believe everything you hear, except for today. Today we're a bit smarter. Back then, not quite.